Okay, good afternoon to everyone. Um, it's such a great pleasure to be invited to talk on Haiti at Cornell University. To talk to Haiti at Cornell University. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Um, to talk about Haiti Chérie, as Haitian want to call her. Yes, Haiti is a female. Haiti is not a man. Haiti is a female. Haiti is not a man. So Haiti, is a beautiful woman full of potential, full of resources. But Haiti also is a beautiful woman that has been constantly raped by hombres macho men or womanizer. So I would like to thank everyone who worked hard to make possible today's event. My acknowledgement goes to Ms. Gloria Christel Blaise, a current PhD student in the Department of Natural Resources. My thanks also to Professor Ernesto Bassi Aravelo, the current director of Latin American and Caribbean Studies, to Leah R. Marx, to Bill Phelan, and to others who made today's event possible. Thank you so very much. Considering Haiti's historical contribution to the political independence, so I saw something, okay, to the political independence of many countries in Latin America, such as Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, and others, and the way that the Haitian Revolution shaped many political movements in the Caribbean and here in the US, it is indeed a great pleasure to lecture on Haiti at an event sponsored by the Latin American and Caribbean Studies. So my lecture will be on the economic motivation behind US intervention and foreign policy in Haiti. So let's start with the general introduction. Between July 2021 and September 2021, at least three fateful events put Haiti on the spotlight of mainstream media. On July 7, 2021, while in office, Haiti's President Jovenel Moïse was assassinated in his residence in Pèlerin 5, Pèlerin 5. 3 weeks after, more precisely on August 15, a magnitude 7.2 earthquake struck the Great South of Haiti. And as a result of that quake, 2,248 people died. The quake injured more than 12,760 people and caused a total damage evaluated at $1 billion. Lastly, during mid-September 2021, that image was circulated worldwide. Mainstream and social media have helped us to understand the way that border patrol were chasing and whipping the black body of Haitian immigrants who enter illegally in the US via the border of Del Rio. Based upon those events above described and rampant poverty, many scholars and policymakers have said that Haiti is a failed state. Haiti is a failed state since in Haiti there is no such a Leviathan in the obedient sense, that is, a Leviathan able to exercise both legitimate physical violence and to provide governmental social services to the general population. In January 2007, for example, William Zachman, then director of conflict management and African studies at Johns Hopkins University, went to Haiti to find out how to explain the endemic conflict in Haiti. Professor Zachman looked at the institutional outcome, and in his research report, he concluded that Haiti is a failed state because Haiti is a place where institutions, economy, security, infrastructure, state, and legitimacy have collapsed. So, considering Haiti's current predicament, in the United States of America, there has always been a will to build a public opinion favorable for a new U.S. military intervention and occupation of the Caribbean country. Accordingly, 3 weeks after the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse, more precisely on July 27, 2021, the editorial board of the Washington Post published an article in which they insinuated that it would be a good thing if the Biden administration could approve the sending of troops to Haiti. For the Washington Post, sending troops to Haiti will help to put order in the current chaotic situation and will help to stabilize both the state and its institutions. But I wonder, what is the overall assessment of past U.S. intervention in an occupation in Haiti by the international community? Is there any connection between Haiti's current predicament and past U.S. intervention? It is the first time for that external forces such as the U.S. and the U.S. Department of State, the United Nations Council, have managed the concept of stability with regard to Haiti. So in today's lecture, I will do my best to unpack some truth about many forms of U.S. occupation in Haiti, starting with the first U.S. occupation of Haiti between 1915 and 1934, in a broader context of the implementation of the Monroe Doctrine. On July 28, Woodrow Wilson, the 28th president of the United States of America, authorized, who was a Democrat, he relied on the idea of stabilization of Haiti and authorized the American warship USS Washington to invade Haiti. Washington official discourse back then was the U.S. Marine were sent to Haiti to restore law and order and to maintain political and economic stability in the country, in the Caribbean. According to President Wilson's speech, the U.S. had a moral imperative to intervene in Haiti, to accompany the Haitian people and to help to stabilize their institution. But as I will show later, the main motivation of that occupation obeyed to the defense and safeguard of the U.S. economic and strategic interests, not only in Haiti, but in the region. Then in 2004, the administration of George Walker Bush, the 43rd president of the U.S., worked hand in hand with the French government of Jacques Chirac. And on February 29, 2004, Washington and Paris engineered a coup. They overthrew the democratically elected President Jean-Bertrand Aristide. One of the main reasons for the coup against Aristide in 2004 was Aristide's discursive request to France to pay back to Haiti the money that between 1825 and 1947, the French, coerced Haitians to pay. So in May 2004, the Organization of the United Nations, through the Resolution 1542, they approved the creation of the United Nations Mission for Haiti Stabilization, MINUSTA. MINUSTA mission was to stabilize and pacify Haiti after Aristide's departure. MINUSTA operates in Haiti between 2004 and 2019. Between 2004 and 2017, MINUSTA spent $7 billion in Haiti. And after 15 years in Haiti, MINUSTA was not able to fulfill its mission as peacekeeper in Haiti. They left Haiti more chaotic than it was before they arrived in 2004. Finally, on June 25th, 2019, the United Nations Security Council, through the Resolution 2476, they approved the creation of the United Nations Integrated Bureau in Haiti, known as BINI. BINI is conceived as a special political mission that aims to strengthen political stability and good governance, including the rule of law in Haiti. Placed under the leadership of Madame Hélène Laline, while Bini is actively engaged and Bini is still in Haiti, one can observe the gradual process of gangsterization of the Haitian state. Now kidnapping is rampant in Haiti. Supposedly, the United States has imposed a guns embargo on Haiti. But according to data provided by the Center on Academic Progress, in 2016, for example, 99% of crime guns recovered in Haiti, those guns came directly from the United States of America. Understanding U.S. occupation and intervention through the lens of Joel S. Migdal. So, as we can see, from the first U.S. occupation to now, all the U.S. intervention and United Nations mission in Haiti has aimed to stabilize and pacify the country. However, instability and political unrest have increased in the country. Therefore, it is relevant to ask, why have those interventions failed? What is the accurate theoretical framework to interpret those interventions and to understand Haiti for a more comprehensive perspective? What can historical sociology of politics teaches us about U.S. foreign relations in Haiti? To answer those questions, in the case of Haiti, I am proposing to not conceive in Haiti as a fragile state, but as a state that has been fragilized. And that process of fragilization of the Haitian state is inscribed into what Fernand Braudel called la longue durée, the long duration. A fragilization that has started long before the 1915-1934 US occupation of Haiti. We cannot, according to myself, understand the fragilization of the Haitian state if we continue to theorize Haiti as a failed state, because the state agents are not able to build a strong Leviathan. So we won't be able to offer a comprehensive interpretation of politics in Haiti if we only rely on Max Weber's definition of the state as the sole entity that claims for itself the monopoly of physical violence. So I am instead proposing to you to embrace the perspective state in society approach that Professor Joel S. Migdal developed in many scholarly work. In this book that you are seeing on the screen, in his book, State Power and Social Forces, Domination and Transformation in the Third World, Migdal raised relevant questions that can be applied to explain rationally the main motive of U.S. intervention in Haiti and how U.S. foreign power that shaped the contour of the Haitian state from the 19th century until now. Migdal asks, when and how have states been able to establish broad political authority? When and how have states established economic agenda for their society to appropriate resources and shape pattern of investment, production, distribution, and consumption? Those questions are meaningful since they allow us to address Haiti's structural problem while avoiding a historical analysis when considering the negative impact of foreign policy designed by the global north and imposed on nations of the global south such as Haiti. They are helpful to understand the influence of both local and transnational social forces that have worked collaboratively to fragilize the state and its institution in Haiti. Illustrative to this point, Migdal expressed the idea that a state is never an entity that enjoys complete autonomy, since there are different interest groups that are constantly seeking to impose their influence or domination over state officials. Those social forces can be both local and transnational. Contrary to the discourse that have postulated that U.S. occupation, from the first U.S. occupation to the current United Nations Integrated Bureau in Haiti, aim to stabilize Haitian institutions, historical data allow me to dismantle this lie. All those interventions and international missions under the hegemonic leadership of the U.S. have been made with the purpose to undermine Haiti's sovereignty and to primarily defend and safeguard economic and strategic U.S. interests in Haiti and the Caribbean, replacing the U.S. occupation of Haiti in the context of the Monroe Doctrine. The point I wanted to make here in this section is that the first U.S. occupation, in Haiti was inscribed into the Monroe Doctrine, which say that Americans are henceforth not be considered as subject for future colonization, but any European power, America for America. The 1823 declaration meant to keep Europe out of the continent and serve to justify U.S. intervention in this region. Notwithstanding, without Haiti, there wouldn't be a Monroe Doctrine. Let me explain that. It was after the defeat of the French army on November 18, 1803 at Vertières, Tourmaille from Cap-Haïtien in the north of Haiti, the French first consul Napoleon Bonaparte decided to sell to the U.S. the territory of French Louisiana. At the time, James Monroe, a protege of President Thomas Jefferson, helped negotiate the Louisiana Purchase on December 1803. Accordingly, 27 years after the American independence, Thomas Jefferson bought the vast Louisiana territory from Napoleon Bonaparte, 500 million acres for 3 cents an acre. That was the single biggest real estate deal in history. That land of the equivalent of 128,000 square miles of river and breadbasket would help to double the territorial size of the U.S. Though the Louisiana Purchase established the basis for turning the U.S. into a continental power, and the 1823 Monroe Doctrine created the ideological and political framework to advance the U.S. geopolitical interests in Latin America and in the Caribbean. The geopolitical and economic U.S. interest in Haiti, from the failure of the acquisition of the Mole Saint Nicolas to the successful U.S. occupation, is the topic of my next point. So, the point I wanted to make here in this section is that since its inception in 1804, Haiti has represented a threat for the master of racialized capitalism, because Haiti, as Africa's oldest daughter, opened the gate for the construction of decent and modern nation-state beyond racial division. In a capitalistic world system that operates according to racialized capitalism. So, because the first Black Empire expunged Western modernity for its pathology, the first Black Empire expunged modernity from its pathological and endemic diseases, such as white supremacy, slavery, racism, and discrimination. So there has been an international hate against Haiti on one hand. But on the other hand, since the 19th century, Haiti was a great interest for powerful Northwestern nations in competition against each other. By the end of the 19th century, when the U.S. started to aggressively implement the Monroe Doctrine in Latin America and the Caribbean, Haiti represents a field of battle between different nations, Germany, France, England, and the U.S., who wanted to impose their cultural, political, and economic hegemony in the region. So, it was in that specific context of political rivalry against those nations, Haiti, because of her strategic location in the Caribbean, represented a field of competition and was of great interest for the U.S. The U.S. sees that regional rivalry existing among Haitian politicians and finance politicians and then influence them. For instance, Sylvain Salnav, reached the presidency in May 1867 with strong support of the US. Then Florville Hippolyte also benefited from US support and became Haiti's president in 1889. That same year, the US government started to put pressure on President Hippolyte to concede the Haitian port of Mole Saint-Nicolas because of its strategic location in the West Wine Passage. The US government wanted to establish a military base in that place. However, despite the diplomatic maneuver of Frederick Douglass, who was sent into Haiti as US Minister and General Consul of the US in Haiti, despite those diplomatic maneuver of Frederick Douglass and the threat made by the US Admiral Bancroft Gherardi, the Haitian intellectual and diplomat Joseph Antenor Firmin, who was serving as Minister of Foreign Affairs in the government of Florville Hippolyte, he resisted to the diplomatic pressure and military threat. And Joseph Antenor Firmin advised Hippolyte to not concede any part of the Haitian territory to the US. It is important to remind that 8 years later, Antenor Firmin published the monumental book De l'égalité des races humaines, The Equality of Human Races, a major book that refuted the fallacious thesis of the biological superiority of white folk and the inferiority of black folk. Since then, the US government made anything possible to boycott Antenor Firmin, who, until he passed away, couldn't become Haiti president. Now, I will talk about another subtopic, US multiple interests and the 1915-1934 military intervention and occupation of Haiti. My intention in this section is to provide data that help you to clarify the idea that the first US occupation of Haiti that started on July 28, 1915 was not a historical accident. After the 1889-1891 unsuccessful negotiation with Haiti to acquire the Mole Saint-Nicolas port, which would have given to the US a military foothold in the Caribbean, the US government worked hard to destabilize Haiti in order to create an atmosphere that fits for the positivistic discourse of stabilization of Haiti and to install law and order in Haiti. Even before July 28, 1915, the day that the US Marine debarked in Haiti, the US had already the control US finance. For example, between December 2nd of 1908 and July 28, 1915, the country experienced 7 presidents. For example, Horace Zamos spent only a few months and was deposed because he refused to give to the US the control of the National Bank of Haiti. The US used coercions to get Theodore Davilma into the National Palace. In an article published in 1920, the African-American and NAACP activist James Weldon Johnson said, and I'm quoting Johnson, toward 1915, the US notified the government of Haiti that it was disposed to recognize the new elected president Theodore Davilma as soon as the Haitian Commission would sign at Washington satisfactory protocol relative to a convention with the US on the model of the Dominican Republic Convention on December 15, 1940. End of quote. Since the Haitian government resisted to the signatory of such convention that would give to the US total control of Haiti's finance and custom, the 28th president of the US, the Democrat Woodrow Wilson, ordered the seizure of the finance reserve of the National Bank of Haiti. That money was transferred to the National City Bank of New York. 2 months later, President Joseph Davilma Theodore was overthrown in a coup financed by the US. The administration of Wilson created the proper condition to make Haiti suitable for the first US occupation. On July 28, the President Guillaume Sam was murdered outside of the French legation. At that time, there was not a single American life in jeopardy in Haiti. However, on that same afternoon of the assassination of Guillaume Sam, the USS Washington, an American man of war, was already in Port-au-Prince Harbor. That was the official US occupation of Haiti. The occupation lasts until 1934. I wanted to briefly highlight some action taken during that occupation that have until today negatively affected the capacity of Haitian people to build economic power. On August 12, 1915, the Haitian Senate elected a new president, Philippe Dartignac. But on August 15, 1915, the US Department of State declared that they won't recognize the president if Dartignac does not sign the convention that will give to the US the absolute control of Haiti finance. On August 19, US Rear Admiral William Banks Caperton fired Haitian from the Office of Customs and designated the Captain Edward L. Beach Sr. as financial advisor in Haiti, while another US citizen, Charles Conrad, became the General Collector of Customs in Haiti. In my PhD dissertation on the politics of Bailey in Haiti, I combined Max Weber and Jean-François Bayard theoretical framework and explained that in order to implement political corruption in the country, it is strategic to control the country port, airport, and customs. The 1915-1934 US occupation of Haiti was characterized by a high level of political corruption. During that occupation that happened in the context of the Monroe Doctrine, the Americans changed the Haitian constitution that allowed them to introduce certain clauses to make white men landowner in Haiti. Because since the first constitution of May 20, 1805, the constitution of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, to the constitution of October 9, 1889, no white man could legally own land in Haiti. But with the complicity of the local elite, the Haitian elites, on June 12, 1918, the occupant realized a fraudulent referendum. They changed the Haitian constitution and imposed to the Haitian society a Carta Magna that was drafted by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was then U.S. Secretary of Marine. Then, under the president of Louis Borneau, more specifically on July 31st, 1922, President Borneau voted a law that legalized the transfer of Haiti's finance from the National Bank of Haiti to the National City Bank of New York. Furthermore, the U.S. pressured Haitian President Louis Borneau to take loans from U.S. banks. Those loans, as documented by many scholars, provided to the U.S. the opportunity to exercise total control on Haiti's finance. On March 12, 2021, the U.S. House of Foreign Affairs Committee held a hearing on the current situation of gangsterization of the Haitian state. During that meeting, U.S. Congresswoman Susan White, a Democrat from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, declared that the U.S. should put pressure on the French government of Emmanuel Macron to pay back to Haiti more than $20 billion in today's currency that Haitians had to unfairly pay to France. Congresswoman White concluded her remark by asking to her colleagues, what is the impact of those payments on Haiti's development? But if currently there are some timid discussion about France's moral obligation to pay reparation and restitution to Haiti for the economic holdup of 1825 they have imposed to Haiti. I personally do think that scholars and policymakers have a moral obligation to agitate in the public arena, debate, to ask also to the US to return to Haiti the money they took from the National Bank of Haiti in 1914 and in 1922. While the mainstream media and scholars recurrently voice that Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, but they never ask why Haiti is so poor. The money that the Marine took from the National Bank of Haiti, as James Weldon Johnson and other scholars has documented, helped to boost Wall Street while Haitians are living under the line of poverty. I have underscored during the first US occupation, many actions were taken with the intention to consolidate US economic and geopolitical interests in Haiti and in the Caribbean. From that occupation to now, the US has implemented in Haiti a series of policies noxious for Haiti's development and sovereignty, but strategic to consolidate US interests. And the last point of my talk today, political transition to democracy in Haiti, US interests, coup d'etat, and change in the country political trajectory from 1991 to 2021. According to the theoretical framework of Samuel P. Huntington, from the Carnation Revolution that happened in Portugal in 1974 until the 1990s, the world has experienced the third wave of democratization. According to Huntington, in Europe, South Asia, in Latin America, so civil political regime substituted to authoritarian and dictatorial regime. In that context, Haiti transitioned from 29 years of the dictatorship of the Duvalier to a form of hybrid military-civil regime. From 1957 to 1986, the Duvalier established a retrograde dictatorship on Haitians. In 1959, François Papadoc Duvalier created the body of the Tonton Macoute, a paramilitary group trained by US Marine that killed more than 60,000 Haitians. The Duvalier regime, led by Papadoc, François Papadoc Duvalier, and his son Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier after his death in 1971, lasts until 1986. During almost 29 years of the dynastic dictatorship of the Duvalier, the US unconditionally supported that dictatorship by providing to the regime the economic and military assistance in order to torture the Haitian population. But in 1986, Haiti entered into a political transition that attempted to challenge the old political order. By the beginning of the 1990s, Haiti was experiencing a very interesting process of political transition toward representative democracy. The country counted with a very interesting young civil society that was actively engaged in the political arena, asking for political changes. In March 1990, for the first time in the political history of the country, a woman, the judge Herta Pascal Trouillot, became the interim president. And Trouillot's mission was to organize free and fair elections. President Trouillot kept her promise. With the help of the international community, she organized those elections that were monitored internationally by the OAS, the Organization of the American States, and the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. In a highly competitive election, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, the former priest and adept of liberation theology, defeated Marc Bazin, the protege of the United States of America. and Aristide won those elections with 2/3 of the suffrage. Marc Bazin, the favorite candidate of the international community, was perceived in the public opinion as a Washington ally. That means someone who, if elected, would govern according to the interests of US imperialism. Aristide, on the other hand, was a fierce activist and someone who managed an anti-imperialist discourse. President Aristide won those elections and was sworn into power on February 7, 1991. In his political speeches, Jean-Bertrand Aristide expressed the idea that Haiti cannot make progress if the economy of the country is captured by a mafia, an oligarchy made of light skin. For Aristide, it was not normal that 1% of light skin that belonged to the oligarchy maintained in neo-slavery the 99% of black-skinned Haitians who have been living as foreigners and strangers in their own territory. But Aristide was governed from an anti-imperialist standpoint. And because of that, on September 29, 1991, the Haitian army, with the CIA help, removed Aristide from power from his nationalistic, from the nationalistic viewpoint, and for his attempt to hold accountable powerful business leader with strong tie to Washington. After 3 years of so he received a coup. And after 3 years of negotiation in Washington, the US government accepted to restore Aristide into power. But for that, Aristide had to accept a number of conditions that respond to US interests and not for the interests of Haitian people. On September 23, 1993, the Security Council of the US adopted the resolution. They adopted the resolution 8067 that contemplated the envoy in Haiti of the United Nations mission in Haiti, MINUA, as a condition to restore Jean-Bertrand Aristide in power. On October 15, 1994, amid huge protests, the Bill Clinton administration restored Aristide in power after Washington coerced him to sign l'Accord de Paris, the Paris Agreement, an agreement that reinforced the implementation of market-oriented reform policies in Haiti that reduced local influence over the economy. During the administration of the Democrat William Bill Clinton, the 42nd president of the US used diplomatic coercion, and Jean-Bertrand Aristide agreed to privatize social services and public institutions as soon as he returned into power. Those neoliberal policies have facilitated the entry of foreign agricultural goods into the Haitian market. Those moves undermine the economy and compromise Haiti's social development. Years later, and I'm concluding, Bill Clinton, in an apologetic fashion, said that he lamented what he did to Haiti. At a hearing in the US Congress, former President Clinton said, and I'm quote, "You know, there is a movement all around the world now. Since 1981, the US has followed a policy until last year. So we start rethinking it. That we, rich country, we produce a lot of food that we should sell to poor country and relieve them of the production of their own food. So thank goodness they can live directly into the industrial era. It has not worked. It might be good for my farmer in our council, but it has not worked. It was a mistake. It was a mistake that I was part of it too. I am not pointing the finger on anybody. I did that. I have to live every day with the consequences on the lost capacity of Haitian to piece of rice crop in Haiti to feed those people. Because what I did, nobody else did that. So after the Munia, that debacle in Haiti in 1994, there will be more international intervention in the Caribbean nation. MINUA will be followed by 4 other missions. MANI in 1996-1997, MIPNI in 1997, MIPONI between 1997 and 2000, MINUSTA between 2004 and 2019, and the BUNI between 2019 to now. Many persons have been asking why Haiti is so unstable, but they don't know necessarily that since the coup of 1991, Haiti has been under the political tutelage of the US through the United Nations. The 1991 coup d'etat changed Haiti's political trajectory. A country that before the coup, supported by the CIA, was doing well in terms of democratic experiences. Aristide was overthrown because in the eye of the US government, he was not a good ally. So without any respect for the Haitian electorate who voted for him and placed him into power, the US abruptly stopped a very interesting ongoing democratic experience that was undergoing Haiti under the presidency of Jean-Bertrand Aristide. The coup d'etat of September 29, 1991 changed drastically Haiti's political trajectory. The coup d'etat opened the way for the implementation of neoliberal policies in Haiti, while giving to the Clinton a bunch of political power in Haiti. The 1991 coup led to the dismantling of Haitian armed force, an armed force that before had the capacity to control the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The current arrogance of the Dominican Republic toward Haitians, as well as the current gangsterization of the Haitian state, are connected to the absence of a professional armed force in Haiti. The 1991 coup against the democratically elected President Jean-Bertrand Aristide gave to the US government the opportunity to coerce Aristide to accept the clause of the Paris Agreement, as I said, that opened the way not only for the neoliberalization of Haitian economy and public services, but also to undermine agriculture and rice production in Haiti. In closing, so both Democratic and Republican US politicians has imposed on Haitian society a political leadership supportive of US interests, but noxious for any nation building project on the Caribbean island. So thank you so very much for your attention. And now I am more willing than to take a question that you might have. Thank you so much.